Tonight on Politicat, Chicagoans head to the polls casting their ballot for the city's next mayor. We break down the candidates and highlights from the campaign trail.
Plus, zeroing in on the issues. We talk to experts on how crime and policing are impacting ballots.
And our reporters will be in the studio and out in the field giving you the latest on election night. All that and more on tonight's special edition of Politicat.
It's your politics right now.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Politicat, where we will be spotlighting Chicago's mayoral election. I'm Braden Spate.
And I'm Ellie Skelly. Today, Chicagoans head to the polls, casting their ballot to determine who will be the city's next mayor. The polls are about to close, and people have been casting ballots since 6 a.m. in all 50 of Chicago's wards.
Over the past week, our reporters have been talking to voters at rallies and campaign events, and some will join us today from a polling site.
While we won't be able to have live results during the show, because the official count won't start until after the polls have closed, we will be highlighting the key issues voters care about and what the polls have said about the candidates' performance so far.
A note for viewers, early polls and predictions have shown that this election is likely to head to a runoff on April 4th, as no candidate appears to obtain the 50% majority needed to directly win the election.
This means that candidates tonight will be fighting to secure their place as either the first or second candidate with the most votes to officially get their name on the ballot for the runoff.
With all that out of the way, let's get started with tonight's program. Thanks so much for joining us. Kicking things off tonight is Politicat's Jonas Blum. He will break down for us who the top candidates are, as well as their chances of advancing in this election.
9 candidates, an almost certain runoff, and a politically threatened incumbent. Let's break down who's leading tonight's mayoral race. First, the incumbent. Mayor Lori Lightfoot was elected in a runoff in 2019, succeeding now U.S. Ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel. At the time of her election, she enjoyed an all-time high approval rating around 70%, according to Victory Research. Despite this initial high, her approval rating dropped in the summer of 2021 and is now sitting at about 30%. For Lightfoot's opponents and some voters, the biggest critiques are her response to crime and city development. She is facing 3 major challengers. First, leading in the polls is the former CEO of Chicago Public Schools, Paul Vallis. His campaign focuses heavily on crime policy, pushing for an increase in police, along with guaranteeing school choice for all Chicago parents through the expansion of charter schools. Next is Brandon Johnson, who recently surged in the polls. He's the commissioner of the 1st District of Cook County. His campaign targets the progressive vote, demonstrated by his endorsement from the left-wing Working Families Party. On the issues, Johnson is for legislation to prevent private equity firms from acquiring residential real estate. He believes in reopening public mental health clinics and supports a freeze on Chicago police hirings. The final top contender is U.S. Representative for the 4th District of Illinois, Jesus Chuy Garcia. Born in Mexico, Garcia became a U.S. citizen in 1977. Garcia is pro-immigration and opposed former President Donald Trump's border policies. Garcia supports an increase in police funding and a proposed elected school board. He also pledges to achieve 100% renewable energy usage in Chicago during his term. A recent poll conducted by M3 Strategies shows that Vallis seems to lead the race with roughly 32% of the vote, followed closely by Johnson, Garcia, and Lightfoot. It does not look like now any candidate will come out of tonight's election winning more than 50% of the votes. The 2 candidates with the most votes will advance to a runoff election on April 4th. Minority candidates: Illinois State Representative Cam Buckner, Marketing Executive Jamal Green, businessman Willie Wilson, and Alderman Sophia King, and Alderman Roderick Sawyer are all hoping for a surge in votes tonight. With elections as close as these, it can be anyone's race. Back to you guys at the desk.
Thanks, Jonas. As a final reminder, polls will be closing at 7 p.m., so be sure and cast your ballot if you haven't already. With so many candidates vying for Chicagoans' vote, the stakes couldn't be higher. Politicat's Bridget Adu-Wadier sat down last week with Medill professor and seasoned reporter on Chicago politics, Peter Slevin, to talk about his biggest takeaways from the election.
There's a new poll that recently came out showing that Paul Vallis seems to be in the lead, and there really isn't a close second at all. It's 9 people, they're all really tightly close together in the polls, and there's been talk about a recall. And what do you think about the possibilities of that?
Well, you've got such a large field. Vallis seems to have cornered a certain part of the market, of the voting market, for those voters who are especially worried by crime or affected by crime. He has made a strong appeal to more conservative Chicago voters. You have the other 8 candidates in one way or another dividing the vote among especially progressive voters and particularly among Black and Hispanic voters.
In regards to, again, this runoff, this potential runoff that may or may not happen, what are some of the possible pairings that we could see in this election? Who might be running against who?
That is one of the great mysteries. It's such a close race heading into Tuesday that it's very hard to know who is going to make it through. The general consensus is that Vallis has the clearest shot at getting to the runoff. And then after him, you have Lori Lightfoot, who has lost part of her voter base from 2019 when she had so many progressives in her corner, against Chuy Garcia, who has a progressive background, at one point had earned the backing of the Chicago Teachers Union and SEIU, the Service Workers International, and is now in Congress. And then you have Brandon Johnson, who this year has the endorsement of the Teachers Union and the Service Workers International and is running very much to the left of the other candidates.
And in regards to crime and policing, could you just give us a brief overview of the candidates and their positions?
There was a very striking poll recently that said that 63% of Chicagoans fear for their safety. And that number was in the 90s for Black residents. It was in the 50s for Hispanic residents. All polls show that crime is the issue that people care about the most. As many as 40% say it is the issue on which they will vote. You have Paul Vallis with the endorsement of the very hardline Fraternal Order of Police and its head, John Catanzara, who's a Trump supporter and spoke in favor and support of the insurrectionists on January 6th. And he is coming across as kind of a tough guy on crime. Lightfoot and the others are saying, yes, you have to do a better job of policing, a more effective job of policing. You can't just, but they say, as Lori Lightfoot likes to say, you cannot arrest your way out of the problem. You have to get at the root causes. But the fact is that the Chicago mayor and mayors across the country have been dealing with a spike in violent crime and in homicides since the beginning of the pandemic, and no one has fully figured out how to stop it.
Early voting has just started, and that has really been increasing, and it's tripled compared to the last election in 2019. Right. And what do you think the reasons are for that?
Well, I think people started to vote differently during the pandemic, when early voting became a bit more normal. Ballots, in this case in Chicago, go out automatically to voters who have requested them ahead of time. Campaigns love early voting because if they can get their voters to turn out early, then their get out the vote operations can turn to the people who haven't yet voted and try to get more people to the polls than might go otherwise.
Thanks, Bridget, and a warm thanks to Professor Slevin.
Earlier today, we had reporters out in the field talking to voters at a polling site in the 49th Ward. Let's hear what the voters have been telling them. First off, we have Micah Sandy joining us. Micah, what can you tell us about what you've been hearing?
We are here at Willie B. White Park, which is serving as the voting center for the 49th Ward. People here are voting throughout the day, voicing their opinions through their ballots. Here is what one voter had to say.
The issues citywide that are most important to me are CPS funding and working with the teachers union, education programs, things like that.
There's been an effort to extend resources to areas that are really underdeveloped and really need the help, like the west side and the south side, and parts of this area too. And so for that reason, I stuck with the incumbent.
Other voters shared why this election is important to them, highlighting their connection to the city. Back to you at the desk.
Thank you, Micah, for bringing us fresh reports from polling sites.
Coming up, how incumbent Mayor Lori Lightfoot is garnering support for her re-election campaign.
Where do the candidates stand on economic reform? Stay tuned to find out.
If you want to be a parent, it doesn't matter how you play, what you wear, how you dance, or even what direction life takes you. You just need to be there. You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care don't need perfection. They just need you.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Cook foods to the right temperature using a food thermometer. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too
Sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew. A girl so smart, so responsible. She must be a keeper.
Welcome back. Mayor Lori Lightfoot pushes for her second term before today's election. She held a campaign rally on Saturday as part of her Get Out the Vote efforts. Bridget Aduwadier took a look at how Lightfoot is galvanizing women voters.
We have our mayor. We're sending her back for 4 years.
Incumbent Mayor Lori Lightfoot urging the women of Chicago to vote 3 days out before the Chicago mayoral election. She emphasized her accomplishments, took shots at opponents, and highlighted her agenda.
Serving our children and adolescents with free, culturally competent mental health and trauma services.
Her bid for re-election comes with some challenges, falling behind two competitors, according to a recent independent poll by M3 Strategies. She's facing criticism from other candidates on her policies on crime and policing, as well as her reputation as an abrasive leader.
I don't know about that mayor. I'm not so sure. You know, people tell me she's mean and she's uncollaborative.
Seasoned Chicago reporter and Medill professor Peter Slevin says that public opinion on Lightfoot is split.
They ask, why is it that she seems to be so combative so often, and isn't she really just shooting herself in the foot by that approach?
Some voters say they are willing to look beyond Lightfoot's flaws.
Through that pandemic, it was a scary time, but I feel with her, she brought us through it.
And vote for her once more.
She deserves a second term to show you exactly what else she's got in store.
The event featured community leaders and activists with music, dancing, and prayer animating the crowd. Getting out the votes, connecting women throughout Chicago. Bridget Aduwadier, Politicat.
Along with building her base among women voters, Lightfoot also gave shoutouts to members of the South and West sides of Chicago in her rally speech.
Lori Lightfoot has been touting achievements from an economic front as a central part of her campaign. This comes as other candidates call for more from the city's pension system and green manufacturing initiatives. Politicat's Jeremy Fredericks is here to dive into the specifics. Jeremy, good evening.
Good evening, Ellie. The unemployment rate for the Chicago metropolitan area is higher than the national average, clocking in at 4.3% in December compared to the 3.5% nationally. Income inequality is still around in the city, but Lightfoot says that her policies are working to address it. it's estimated that more than a fifth of citizens are still under the poverty line. She points to the growing amount of corporations with Chicago-based offices, including John Deere, Google, and Cisco, startups, and investments in affordable housing near public transit. The mayor said her administration gave more than $10 million to struggling businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic, while speeding up the approval process for food license and reforming hospitality. Lightfoot also highlights her 3-year-old initiative allocating resources to develop Chicago's underserved neighborhoods in the South and West Side. More than $2 billion has been invested in affordable housing and grants to small businesses.
Well, I can tell you what we've specifically done. A $1 billion commitment to affordable housing, the largest commitment in the history of the city.
Congressman Chuy Garcia is pushing for attracting environmentally friendly industries like manufacturers of electric cars and batteries. He says green manufacturing is the future and wants to follow in the footsteps of Washington, D.C. and the state of Illinois in establishing banks for environmentally friendly investments. Garcia is also calling for more apprenticeship programs, initiatives to help hire local residents and formerly incarcerated individuals, and temporary tax relief for small businesses and homeowners. He says the economy is suffering because of the high crime rates in Chicago.
Because of Chicago's violence problem and crime, many businesses are going to other cities across the South. We can stop the bleeding by making Chicago a safer city.
Paul Vallis focuses on reforming the pension system. The latest data from 2020 shows that the city is underfunding pensions for police officers, firefighters, and other city workers. Last year, more than $2 billion of the budget was allocated to pensions, only a fraction of what is needed. Vallis proposes putting pensions under independent managers and getting the state government in Springfield involved. His plan is for the state to invest about $500 million into pensions for Chicago teachers that the city currently pays for. That freed up money will then be placed into pensions for firefighters, police officers, and municipal workers. Lightfoot is calling for the state government to take over the issue as well. Back to you at the desk, Ellie.
Thanks, Jeremy. The mayor will be responsible for a budget of over $15 billion.
Coming up, how mobilizers have been working to rally the vote amid historically low turnout rates. And I take a closer look at how the candidates are looking to reform Chicago's public school system.
If you want to be a parent, it doesn't matter how you play, what you wear, how you dance, or even what direction life takes you. You just need to be there. You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care don't need perfection. They just need you.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Cook foods to the right temperature using a food thermometer. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too
Hey, sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew. A girl so smart, so responsible, she must be a kid.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Northwestern. We will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern. Fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Welcome back to our special edition of Politicat on Chicago's mayoral election. I'm Bridget Adu-Wadier.
And I'm Alexia Cadota-Browner. Thanks for joining us.
This election season, nonprofits and campaigns have worked hard to get out the vote in Chicago communities after only 35% of registered voters turned out for the 2019 mayoral elections. Politicat's Sadie Frankel tells us how these groups have been mobilizing voters.
Advocates and politicians are working to increase voter turnout throughout Chicago, but especially in marginalized communities.
We can't completely disentangle that historical context and that legacy of disenfranchisement when it comes to making an assessment.
The turnout among these communities is often lower than in other areas. In the 2022 midterm election, under 40% of voters turned out in majority Asian, Black, or Latino precincts, while the number stands at 60% in majority white areas.
Many people get tripped up by the logistical and bureaucratic and practical barriers.
The reasons behind low voter turnout range from a history of being discouraged or unable to vote and concerns about the amount of accessible information available to voters.
There are a lot more people who are interested in voting, who are interested in having their voices heard.
Many organizations offer materials about voting rights and logistics, but a voter needs to know where to look for that information.
What I've been trained to how to interact with the voters, go meet them where they're at, whether it's at home or right now at the polling place.
When voter turnout is low in specific communities, they are underrepresented in government.
Their issues need to be heard.
Voting right activists say that there is still a long way to go.
There still continue to be some people who are disenfranchised despite their deep interest in participating.
Encouraging all Chicagoans to get out the vote, Sadie Frankel, Politicat.
Thanks, Sadie. Although the ballot has closed for this round of the election, you should go to chicagoelections.gov for more info on how to register to vote in future elections.
Chicago Public Schools is the fourth largest school district in the nation, with 635 schools. But a recent poll from the Illinois Policy Institute found that just 33% of Chicagoans are satisfied with public education in Chicago. Politicat's Braden Spate is back to break down how education is affecting the upcoming election.
Thanks, Alexia. Whichever candidate is elected will be the last mayor to have control over Chicago public schools. Beginning in 2025, Chicago will begin phasing in school board elections to oversee the $9.4 billion budget. But for now, the next mayor will appoint the new school district CEO and 7 school board members. CPS is facing a projected budget deficit of $600 million starting in 2026. And they are rapidly losing enrollment. CPS has lost more than 100,000 students in the past 2 decades, and 95 elementary schools have less than 250 students. This is key because portions of the school budget are based on the number of enrolled students. CPS only has 75% of what it needs to give students a, quote, adequate education. There is currently a temporary ban on school closings, but that ends in 2025. Candidates Paul Vallis, Willie Wilson, Roderick Sawyer, and Sophia King say they support closing severely under-enrolled schools, according to a Chicago Sun-Times and WBEZ mayoral candidate questionnaire. In that same questionnaire, Lori Lightfoot and Chuy Garcia say closing schools is a last resort. During her time in office, Lightfoot had a tense relationship with the Chicago Teachers Union. In January of 2022, the Chicago Teachers Union refused to teach in person unless certain COVID-19 safety protocols were put in place. Mayor Lori Lightfoot wanted students to be in person as soon as possible. Classes were canceled for 5 days before an agreement was reached. The CTU has endorsed Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson. Frontrunner Paul Vallis and former CPS CEO receiving criticism for policies he implemented during his tenure. This includes creating an accountability system, placing schools with low test scores on probation, which led to some of the school closures. Under his new plan for CPS, Vallis supports selective enrollment and magnet programs in neighborhood schools.
Thanks, Braden. Politicat will continue to see if and how education reform will take center stage in the near future.
And now we want to check in with our reporters who went to polling sites in Chicago today. Angela joins us. Angela, what more are you hearing from the voters?
Here at the Willie B. White Park Polling Center, many issues spoke to voters this election. One of the biggest, public safety and crime.
Public safety is a big one here in this neighborhood. We have a school right here. I live maybe a block away from the school. Within the past 3 months, I done had under a teen get shot in the head right here. A couple of people shot and killed around the corner. So trying to make a difference there is a big issue for me.
Austin was one of 3 voters we spoke to today regarding the concern of citizens in Chicago. Back to you at the studio.
Really good information. Thank you, Angela, for all of your work.
Coming up, Illinois is regarded as a safe haven for abortion rights, but candidates are still campaigning to safeguard it. We break down why.
And how a ward in Chicago is posed to make electoral history.
If you want to be a parent, it doesn't matter how you play, what you wear, how you dance, or even what direction life takes you. You just need to be there. You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care don't need perfection. They just need you.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Cook foods to the right temperature using a food thermometer. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too...
Hey, sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew. A girl so smart, so responsible. She must be a keeper.
Welcome back. 42% of voters considered abortion to be extremely important in the 2022 midterm elections, according to a Gallup poll. Although Illinois is considered a safe haven for abortion access, it still impacts the state's politics. Politicat's Micah Sandy takes a look at how this issue has played out on the mayor's race.
In Illinois, abortion legislation is dependent on statewide positions like the state legislature or state Supreme Court. But that doesn't mean city officials can't impact abortion access.
There are things that local governments can do within a state to make it like more or less friendly to reproductive health care.
Weinberg history professor Katherine Macer teaches a course on the history of abortion in the United States. She says Roe v. Wade, overturned last June, for nearly 50 years acted as an important foundation for abortion rights, but didn't immediately allow for access.
Clinics needed to open, doctors needed to be willing to provide abortion.
The Hyde Amendment, passed in 1977, prevented federal funding like Medicaid to pay for abortions,
which made it impossible to use federal funding, like in Medicaid in particular. So if you get your health care in part through the federal government, you couldn't use that funding to get an abortion.
Midwest Access Coalition is a nonprofit organization helping people access safe and legal abortions.
As we're a practical support fund, we support people traveling to, from, and within the Midwest for their abortion procedures.
Deschbach says it is important for Chicago's mayor to continue funding organizations that coordinate travel costs, resources, and childcare related to abortion.
Whoever becomes mayor after the election tomorrow, we really hope that they continue to allocate funds.
No mayoral candidate says they're anti-abortion, but in a 2009 interview, Paul Vallis said he's religiously against abortion, but it does not affect his politics. Deschbach says the Chicago mayor's stance is crucial.
To unequivocally indicate that they are pro-abortion and support access for abortion, not just for all genders, not just for women.
Micah Sandy for Politicat.
Thanks, Micah.
Switching gears to criminal justice reform, yet another hot-button issue among Chicago voters as they continue to cast their votes this evening. Politicat's Simone Garber tells us more about which voters are prioritizing criminal justice reform and how candidates are responding.
Thanks, Bridget. According to a poll commissioned by local media outlets, for city residents, criminal justice reform ranks second in importance behind crime and public safety. But 31% of black voters listed criminal justice reform as their top issue, while only 4% of white voters did the same, indicating just how divided criminal justice reform is along racial lines. Turning to the candidates, Paul Vallis has labeled himself as tough on crime. Endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police, he promotes proactive policing to curb violent crime and a citywide witness protection program, which provides around-the-clock protection for all witnesses in high-threat environments. And Mayor Lori Lightfoot says reform requires a, quote, community-up approach. Her time as a federal prosecutor and head of the Police Accountability Task Force enabled her to balance both criminal justice reform and public safety as mayor. She says she'll continue this work at the state, local, and federal levels. Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson plans to decrease the number of police officers patrolling the city. His public safety proposal encourages promotions in the officer rank and file by increasing the number of detectives dedicated to preventing crime in Chicago's most vulnerable neighborhoods.
40% of the calls that come through 911 are mental health crises. I'm actually investing in having social workers, therapists to show up on the front line to actually free up law enforcement to deal with the more severe crime that happens in the city of Chicago.
Congressman Chuy Garcia has called for sweeping reform within the criminal justice system. He cites an over-toleration for the school-to-prison pipeline as contributing to the disproportionate incarceration of people of color and low-income individuals. Criminal justice reform is also relevant at the state level. Today's mayoral election comes after Governor J.B. Pritzker signed an amendment to the SAFETY Act last December. This ensures pre-trial detention based on community risk, not financial means. The amendment follows extensive collaboration with community advocates, public defenders, and others at the front lines of criminal justice reform to install a more equitable trial process. Back to you at the desk.
Thanks, Simone. You can find more information on the SAFETY Act at icjia.illinois.gov.
Finally, in addition to the mayoral election, 41 of Chicago's 50 wards have aldermanic candidates competing in their own elections tonight. The 14th ward, whose population is majority Hispanic, is preparing to have their first Latino alderman. Politicat's Luis Castaneda takes a look at what the election means for its residents.
I'm here in the 14th ward of Chicago, where for over 50 years, the same alderman has been in office. Well, on Tuesday, 2 new candidates are looking to change that.
There is a huge opportunity here for our community to see someone that looks like them be a part of this position.
The 14th ward has received an influx of Hispanic residents since the 80s. 88% of the ward is now Hispanic, according to the 2020 census. Edward Burke began serving as an alderman in 1969. Now, he faces charges of bribery and extortion and is not running for re-election. District Director for the Cook County Commissioner, J. Gutierrez, is facing staff assistant for the city clerk's office, Raul Reyes.
We've had a cloud over the 14th ward for over 50 years, and on Tuesday needs to end.
Feeling neglected by the Burke office in the past, Gutierrez says her tenure would be different.
Having good staff, bilingual staffers are willing to service our community.
She says she aims to fix crumbling infrastructure and quickly respond to the community requests.
We need to be that helping hand in our ward.
While Gutierrez has been endorsed by mayoral candidate Jesus Chuy Garcia, her opponent Reyes has received a financial contribution from Alderman Burke's brother, Dan Burke, and has commended the current alderman's achievements.
It didn't seem like they cared what color the elected official was, as long as the city services, the needs were being met.
Through over 25 years volunteering with the ward office, Reyes says he's gotten to know the community.
Getting alleys done, sidewalks, lights are out, you would get a call and you try to meet that need by going through the ward office.
Regardless of who's elected, longtime 14th resident Marilyn Hartman is relieved to see change.
It seems that a lot of corruption goes on and the government finally catches up with these guys when they're in their 80s.
Norma Hernandez, state representative of the 77th District, says it's important to recognize how crucial aldermen's positions are in city council.
Segregation in our communities has been intentional, and it's those folks in city council who have allowed policymakers and urban planners design communities in that way.
A community seeing light of better political representation.
And I think this just provides an opportunity for us to continue building amongst all demographics to understand the importance of having diversity within our government structures.
From Archer Heights, Chicago, Luis Castañeda, Politicat.
Thank you, Louis. With only 2 candidates on the ballot, there will not be a runoff in the 14th ward election.
That's all we have for tonight's coverage on the mayoral election. Thank you so much for joining us.
This is also our last Politicat of the quarter. Shout out to all the reporters, producers, control room staff, and everyone who contributed to our shows this quarter.
And stay tuned for NNN's morning show this Sunday.
Have a good night.